Surprise! guys, if we can find a seat, we'll get the program started here. I forget the happy hours.
It's perfect. That's good. That's fine. Yeah. I'm just going to zoom it out.
Okay, guys, if everybody can sit down, we'll get started, okay? On behalf of the ASA trustees and the staff at ASA, I'd like to welcome you all to Bozeman, Montana for the 2016 Fall Focus Program. Hopefully you'll get a lot out of this educational program today, and we invite you to be sure and join us for committee meetings and board meetings the next couple of days thereafter. I'd like to start off by thanking a few people, and especially the staff for last night's learning about our whole new building. I think that's a fun and exciting time, and I hope everybody else enjoyed themselves. And I just again like to thank the whole staff for welcoming everybody and putting that on and showing off our new building. So thanks. Also a big And I don't know how many made it, but I heard we had a pretty good function that the Burnhams and the Montana State Simmental Association put on up in Helena on Thursday, and thanks for offering that as part of that to this event, Burnham. Another thank you, that little brochure that was handed out last night, I don't know many on just the history of ASA and through the steps of years that Emmy put on, or put together. Very nicely done, I think, and it really reflected on our history of our association. So thank you for that. Another big thank you is to the sponsors that helped put on this event. It's done through the foundation, and Bill McDonald's kind of in charge of that, so I'm just going to call on him to give you the list of who the sponsors are and go from there.
Thank you, Dale. It's great to be here in Bozeman again, and we did have a really great program last night. Looking forward to a very good educational program today, and it wouldn't be possible without the folks that helped sponsor this event. And so we'd like to thank Gene Seek, AgriClear Incorporated, Tom Brothers Ranch, Brant Farms, Learman Family Simmentals, McDonald Farms, Trinity Farms, Buzzard Hollow Ranches, Gateway Simmentals, Pine Ridge Ranch, Progressive Cattlemen, Accelerated Genetics, Lanting Enterprises, Kathy and Wade Shafer, that's probably more Kathy, Bulls of the Big Sky, and Gibbs Farms, and Origin. And I know several of you are here. Stand up or wave your arm, let folks get to see you. And folks, if you are get around, thank you to folks. How much we appreciate them sponsoring this great event.
Big sponsor of Mark Barnell as well.
Mark Barnell. Thank you very much, Mark. So enjoy, and I'll turn it back to David.
Again, thanks for everybody coming, and outside of this, there's lots to do around Bozeman. Hopefully you'll get a chance to visit some of the hot spots around town and Yellowstone Park or any of the others, so have fun while you're here. And I'm gonna turn this over to Jackie and on with the rest of the program. Thank you.
All right, so our first speaker, we wanted to invite Dr. Patrick Hatfield from Montana State University. He is the chair of the Department of Animal and Range Sciences there, and he's going to tell us about all the exciting research that Montana State has to offer to improve livestock production. And so thank you, Dr. Hatfield, for joining us. I'm glad that we've got some Montana State University represented here, and also Dr. Endicott is in the crowd. She was slated to be a speaker for our youth program, and we didn't quite get the enrollment that we wanted for our youth program, but thank you, Rachel, for coming.
Thank you, Jackie. It's a real pleasure to be here. Oh, thank you. There we go. So it is an honor to be here, but this is a little frightening for me because I started out my career 8 years at the U.S. Sheep Experiment Station, 20 years in sheep production, research, and teaching. Probably the last 3 years, in addition to the sheep production, research, and teaching, I've been interim or actual department head. So really what you've got here, you've really invited an overeducated sheep herder that's gone kind of the dark side into administration. So you can thank Jackie for that. She asked for my resume after she invited me to talk. Rachel, sitting back there, has instructions that if I start getting off into sheep stories, she's going to wave at me and try to get me back online. But one of the things we do...
Did you flip it off?
Okay. No, it's all right. Does that work?
Make sure that's off, Jack.
Can you all hear me in the back? Okay, thanks.
Yes, that's working right.
Here you go. Okay, we've got another one.
Garrett, point it towards your mouth.
Okay, we'll try this. But one of the things we do in academia is kind of like the breeding industry, the way it used to be. We like to trace our pedigree. And so I did my PhD work at the University of Nebraska, and even though I've been a sheep guy for almost the last 30 years, I did do my work with Dr. Don Clanton, who was one of the premier beef cattle researchers in the United States at the time. And Dr. Clanton was on the board of trustees at American Simmental from 1985 to 1992, and an early advocate for science and selection. So I'm proud of my academic heritage. One of the things that I'm going to spend a little time talking about research, but what I really want to do is talk about the tradition that's gone on at Montana State University, where we came from, and where we're going in the future. And I think a lot of that really started when we talk about tradition. It's Montana State's Department of Animal and Range Sciences really has a proud and productive past, starting with Dr. Woodward, who began his career at Northern Montana Ag Experiment Station in Havre. Before World War II, he was at Havre. After the war, he continued his pivotal work in record keeping and developed the Line 1 Herefords at Miles City. The work continued into the 70s with work on calving ease, carcass traits, crossbreeding by men like Pete Berfning and Don Kress and others that you see here. But of real relevance, I think, to the Montana grazing livestock industry is the work on sire and production environment by men like Mike Tess, and ultimately the incorporation of this work into our teaching program led by gentlemen like Mike Tess and John Patterson, who I believe are here. So when we talk about these things, one of the things we really like to do is take what we've learned in the field, things we've done cooperatively with people like yourselves, and bring it to our teaching program. So in our program, we have things like our calving management, which has its start with American Simmental and their partnership with the Bear Ranch. That was Mike Tess, John Patterson, and has continued on today with Hannah Del Curto, our instructor and livestock judging coach. Our beef practicum that Rayanne Sodegi started, and I ran the sheep practicum on the other end of things. Although we're an academic program and we really stress science and agriculture, we still have a real connection to hands-on production agriculture, and we stress that. We just recently, a couple of years ago, were able to come back with a livestock judging team. So we're a little bit like our football team. You know, we're never going to beat Texas A&M, but it's a great opportunity for kids to get involved and really be part of the program. Beef cattle management that Rachel has so graciously taught over the last couple of years, even though she's extension and doesn't really have a teaching appointment. Rachel, again, stresses that connection to the industry. And starting next year, our Nancy Cameron Endowed Chair in Range Beef Cattle Production, Dr. Tim Del Curto from Oregon, will take that class over. Hannah's also taken our Steer a Year program. How many of you are familiar with that? Oh, more of you need to be. That's where you donate a steer to us. We feed it, we finish it, the students manage the whole program, and then we sell that animal to help support our teaching program. One of the neat things going on right now is these steers that are being finished, that were just finished here in the last month or so. We sold 9 animals to Montana State University's Miller Dining Hall. So the beef that's being raised on campus is also being served on campus. And I bet you someday somebody in this room will go to where President Wadek Cruzado is going to hit you up for money, and she'll serve you Montana beef raised on campus. So I wanted to mention, we kind of talked about the people in the past, but this tradition has gone on with people like Jane Ann Bowles, our meat scientist, Jim Bartonelli, reproductive physiology, Jan Bowman, who runs a ranch down in Paradise Valley, is our ruminant nutritionist. Carl Yeoman from New Zealand, rumen microbiology. Rachel, sitting there, a gal from Ennis, who beef cattle extension and does production research, just as does Megan Van Amen, another beef cattle extension specialist who's located in Miles City. So we have 2 beef cattle extension specialists trying to cover the state. Hannah Del Curto, again, who does our livestock judging, teaches a lot of our classes. Jennifer Thompson, who just started a few years ago, beef cattle breeding. And again, Dr. Tim Del Curto. We're really excited about the Nancy Cameron Endowed Chair. That really is adding to our program. One of the really neat things of Montana right now, where a lot of other schools years ago became rather basic, chaste, NIH, NSF, those are funding sources. Montana stayed true to its core, and we stayed with production animal science. And I think that's turned around to be a real benefit to us. So our program is growing. We have more faculty, more students, more grad students than we've ever had in the past. So just real briefly, one thing I want to keep in mind is that we're talking about animal science here, mainly beef cattle research and such things, but we still are the Animal and Range Science Department. We're focused on the grazing livestock industry, whether that be sheep or cattle. We also have, the last wool lab in the United States, okay? So we really do have a complete sheep program. Our equine science program is growing, and we have a lot of students that come to us that way. They're still getting a degree in animal science, but with an emphasis in equine science. So we're reaching out to a much more diverse student population than we've had in the past. So some of the things that are going on, beef cattle temperament, and so Dr. Jane Ann Bowles and some others have looked at that, and what they're finding is plasma lactate, rectal temperatures are 2 objective measures that may potentially help us predict animal temperament. Impacts of sugar beets on steer backgrounding performance. This is some work Megan did. And, you know, one of the most expensive things we've got going for our grazing livestock industry is feed, whether we're buying feed or we're buying or leasing grazing ground. So we're looking at ways to help control those costs. So with sugar beets, what Megan found is that we can replace up to 45% of barley without any negative impacts. One of the neat things here too is it's kind of a problem to feed sugar beets. But in this day and age, with all of the development, with the landscaping that's going on, what Megan found is one of these commercial size shredders that they use for trees and such, does a great job of cutting up sugar beets. Jim Barnelli and others looking at, that's Brett Olson, looking at magnetic resin spectrometry. And what Brett's finding is that cattle entering winter, which are not fed hay, what they tend to do is lower their metabolic rate. In essence, their energy requirements are going down as they adjust to a lower plane of nutrition. So can we cheapen up our feed sources a little bit because we have these animals that fit better with that grazing environment? Some other things, Rachel's working on things with rumensin and calcium propionate, impacts on growth, puberty, and reproductive performance. Temperament effects on growth rate, tenderness. Growth rate affected by tenderness of, again, a lot of work still with Simmental. And then this metabolome. The definition of this isn't for you all, this is for me, because again, I'm just kind of an old sheep herder. But these things and their impacts on reproductive processes in beef cattle, I think is some of that basic work that may take us to the next level in our applied sciences and ultimately how it impacts the industry. So 50 years ago, Don thought that Bozeman was a good place to locate American Simmental Association because Montana State University's Animal Science Department and the Beef Performance Office. Okay? And I got this out of that book, the American Simmental Association Record of Achievement. And it's because of leadership, what Don was quoted as saying in the College of Ag and bringing Simmental to this country, that became the nation's headquarters of the American Simmental Association in Bozeman. And so what I really want to close with here is that commitment to the land grant mission continues today with MSU's leadership and passion for ag. President Cruzado is a big component or proponent of agriculture. She shows up in our department on a fairly regular basis and is doing a lot for external fundraising for programs in our department. And Charles Boyer, our Dean, College of Ag, who was here last night, also the first president of agriculture at Montana State University, is doing an outstanding job of keeping our university connected with your industry. So, kind of in closing, the Department of Animal Range Science and the College of Ag, we really look forward to the continuing future of cooperation between forward-thinking ag industries led by organizations like the American Simmental Association. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hatfield. We have one little gift for you. Some local goodies, which you probably get all the time, but some kernels and huckleberry jams. Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, and I just wanted to mention, since I've been on board in the last 3 years, we've had a great collaboration with Montana State University, and it's here in town. It's just a natural collaboration. We've been working with the Bear Ranch is Mike Tesson here somewhere? I don't know how long we've been breeding cattle there at the Carcass Merit program, but we've also expanded that with Rachel Endicott and Jennifer Thompson, looking at some correlated traits with between carcass and maternal, and also genomics of these carcass traits. We've also had Jennifer Thompson. Dr. Thompson was a recipient of the Walton Berry Scholarship. If Jim Berry is in the room, I'm not sure. But anyway, they were a recipient a couple years ago, and so we really have some strong ties with Montana State, and we love that and want to continue it. So thank you.
Thank you, Jackie.
Right, I'm going to switch slides, and next up is a joint talk by Dr. Wade Shafer and Lauren Hyde and myself, and we're hoping to keep this an interactive communication among all you guys and ourselves. And so Wade, I'll load your talks, but I don't think Wade needs an introduction. Everybody knows him.
Sorry about that. I'd like to start out by thanking each and every one of you for taking time out of your busy lives to come and spend the weekend with us in Bozeman. Said this in the past that when we put these events on, we're never quite sure what kind of turnout we're going to get. But I think by any gauge, this is awesome. Just an awesome turnout. Last night was wonderful. It's great to have you all over. We've got a very strong slate of speakers for today, following me. I have been tasked of the this triad here of speakers, I've been tasked with talking about the history of things, and typically that means you're an old fossil. So that's what I've been tasked with, but I'm gonna blend in a little bit of the future. We're going to talk about the past and how it got us to where we are today, and then I'm going to blend in a little bit of a glimpse of the future. I'm not going to talk a lot about it because you're going to see the future up front and personal with the speakers that come later today. Also want to make an announcement now so we don't forget. We actually have a poet laureate of the American Simmental Association. He's a past chairman. His name is Bill McDonald. And I asked him about a month ago if he could put together a poem for this event, and he said, well, why can't you just use the last one I did? And I said, well, this is kind of a mixed audience. That was a little racy. So he has put together a poem specifically for this event, and he is going to share that with us over dinner tonight, so be prepared for that. So anyway, as I said, we're going to take a stroll down genetic improvement lane is what I'm calling this, and I pulled some of the more heavily used bulls over the years. You can see all the way from back to the Parisian and Gallant and Signal and so forth days to the modern bulls, and some of those bulls aren't even purebred Simmental. They're actually hybrids, and at one time I think that was probably thought to be sacrilegious. Not anymore. I think most of us accept the fact that hybrids are a very valid, solid component in modern animal breeding. Have been in many other species for a long time. So anyway, if we want to understand genetic improvement, we have to start at the core, and we have to understand, oh, I've got the wrong slide set here.
Really?
Yep.
Well, ad-lib for a second.
Yeah.
Tell us a poem.
Let's see. You got your poem ready there, Joe? Yeah, but I took some of these slides out. It'll be too long.
Just skip them. Just skip them.
Well, some of them aren't in there either. Let's see. Sorry about that.
We got a crowd view.
Actually, I'm kind of serious about that poem thing. Maybe we should do this poem. Ready, Bill? Come on.
Do you have the moonshine to go with it?
No, that's for later. That's for the racing ones. Here's
wait.
Wade. He's been resting in the shade.
Maybe we shouldn't.
So,
Wait.
Wade, he asked me about, early there in, March, come up with a little, limerick for when the,
You can go through.
board was gonna be there at the, headquarters for the first time, so we did that one, and then, and like you said, he asked me about a month ago, said, can you, come up with another poem? And he said, I said, well, what, can't you use the one we had before? He said, no, said the Chamber of Commerce is gonna be there, and it's gonna be a public event, so we can't do that. But, we flew out here Monday, and the first thing we did was come to the headquarters and looked, and just really impressed with it. But I hadn't gotten my poem written yet, because I hadn't found my muse. But I found it yesterday morning, because you gotta find your motivation to find your muse. So Nancy told me that I couldn't get breakfast until I'd written that poem. So, here it is. And just kind of imagine that we were out there last night, because not only was Wade resting in the shade, he's got a little CRS. We were supposed to do this last night. But here's to the American Simmental and good old Parisian that started it all. Today under the Rocky Mountain view, and its grandeur, we reminisce, can't even read my own writing. Today under the Rocky Mountain view, we gather to reminisce and enjoy friendly chatter. This new building is certainly grand, very fitting for the best cattle breed in the land. As we say goodbye to one Simmental way, may all the members and staff of ASA live long and prosper at ASA, and God bless One Genetics Way.
Yay.
Well, I can tell you. That was a much cleaner version than Bill's previous. No, I'm exaggerating. His prior poem was plenty clean, given some of his other poems. So anyway, as I said, we're going to take a stroll down genetic improvement lane. And in order to do that, we need to understand what is at the core of genetic improvement. And that is the science of animal breeding. The science of animal breeding is at the core of genetic improvement. Now, what is the science of animal breeding? Well, I have kind of taken any more. If I want to get a definition, I go online. And I go to a place called Wikipedia. It seems to be where the definition of everything resides. Here's what Wikipedia says. The science of animal breeding is a branch of animal science that addresses the evaluation of the genetic value of livestock. The scientific theory of animal breeding incorporates population genetics, quantitative genetics, statistics, and more recently, genomics, Mahdi Sachi, and is based on the pioneering work of Sewell Wright, J. Lush, and Charles Henderson. So Wikipedia is crediting these three gentlemen, with being the founders of animal breeding. So Sewell Wright, and as you see, they resided born over 100 years ago. They resided, Sewell Wright over on the left would be thought to be more of a population geneticist and developed a lot of theories in population genetics. He is credited with developing the calculation for inbreeding, which may have something to do with the fact that his parents were first cousins. Over here, we have J. Lush. J. Lush, some people in this room actually knew J. Lush. He was an Iowegian. Dave Nichols would have known J. Lush. I bet you, Gordon, you knew J. Lush. Probably Bert Moore. Anyway, he was an Iowa farm boy, grew up in Iowa. Okay? He went off to Kansas to get educated, came back to Iowa State, and his career was spent at Iowa State. He would be probably considered to be more of a quantitative geneticist. He was somebody that recognized very early that we could do a lot better job when we're making selection decisions if we get under the hide, if we go beyond just straight phenotypes. So he employed things like heritability and genetic correlations into selection programs. Very visionary at the time. Over here we have Charles Henderson, somebody we refer to as Chuck in the world of animal breeding. Chuck raised the level of statistical methodology in animal breeding through the roof. Most of you have probably heard of best linear unbiased prediction, or BLUP. Chuck Henderson developed that methodology. He developed things called mixed model equations. So he was seen as quite a founder when it came to the statistical end of animal breeding. Now, Wikipedia sometimes isn't as thorough, I think, as I'd like to see it. I think if we were to ask most any animal breeder if these three would be considered founders, I think most every animal breeder would say, yeah, that's pretty fair. But this animal breeder is going to say we're missing one component here. We're missing a component, and that is this. To this list here, I would like to add, we're not only addressing the evaluation of the genetic value, we also want to know the economic value of an animal based on their genetic levels. So I would add this to the definition on Wikipedia. That creates a cascade of things to add. I would add this to that list, economic selection index theory. And then that has to make space for a fellow named Lenoy Hazel, also at Iowa State. Actually an Iowa State farm boy, and I know you Iowegians also knew him as well. Bert was just telling me, Bert Moore was telling me he had him, or he was a professor of animal, or he had a class in animal breeding under Lenoy Hazel. So in the progression of things, Jay Lush and Lenoy Hazel trained 250 plus graduate students in animal breeding. So Iowa State was pretty much the epicenter of animal breeding. Charles Henderson, Lenoy Hazel was trained by Jay Lush. Jay Lush was Lenoy Hazel's major professor, and Hazel actually turned out to be Henderson's major professor, and then Henderson went on to Cornell. And there are implications in all this, and we'll get to it as we move down this path in history. So Henderson goes off to Cornell, and you'll see how that evolves as we move down the path. So what's my definition? What I simply say when it comes to animal breeding is really where the rubber meets the road. It's where you take all the theory, the statistics, the population genetics, the genomics, now you put it all together and you get some use out of it. You actually apply it in the real world. That's animal breeding, and that's why it was always so appealing to me. Animal breeding was so appealing because it's probably one of the most practical sciences there is. Now, when I say that, some of you probably think, wow, I can't believe I don't see hardly anything practical about animal breeding. But believe me, animal breeding is one of the most practical sciences there is. Right, Monty? Monty says, yes, it is. So anyway, that brings us to where we started, our genesis. And if you had the opportunity last night to go into our boardroom, you would have seen this. This is a stained glass window with the motto that was created by the founders of the American Simmental Association in the late 60s. This motto says, visual analysis tells you what a Simmental appears to be. His pedigree tells you what he should be. his performance and progeny tests tell you what he actually is. That was pretty insightful for the late 60s. We didn't have EPDs then. We didn't have economic indexes. We didn't have all the things we have now. Frankly, for a breed association, that might have been seen as sacrilegious back then, because breed associations back in that time really weren't much about genetic improvement. They were more about social function. So that was pretty heady stuff. And I think when you go back and you see this, this was what our founding fathers put together. I think this goes a long ways towards explaining how we have stayed out of the ditch, how we have made so much progress, because our founding fathers had a lot of insight, and we built upon that insight. So Don Vanneman, you saw him last night. He talked last night, the grand opening. He commissioned the first sire summary in the history, as far as I know, the history of beef cattle breeding. He did it with, as he said, they used Boeing computers. Steve used to fly back and forth to Seattle. Boeing airplane company had a computer division, and they had a bunch of big computers that filled the room. You can see the room is filled here with computers. Don Vanneman used a guy named Paul Miller. I learned something last night. Paul Miller was actually with ABS. Here's the first sire summary. There aren't many of these around. I stole this out of Steve's office. Probably doesn't even know I have it. I'll put it back. Anyway, I'm going to read you the foreword, the part of the foreword that Don Vanneman wrote. So Don Vanneman says, this publication represents a first in the history of beef cattle in the United States of America, a national sire summary, indicating the genetic potential of sires used nationally in the Simmental breed. This sire summary will completely change methods of breeding, selecting, showing, and selling a Simmental cow. It will keep the honest cattleman in business and eliminate the exploiter who would promote valueless bulls. By hard sell advertising and sharp management practices, but which would not stand up genetically in the Simmental performance testing procedures. Now when you think about that, that was written back in 1971. Again, that's pretty insightful stuff. Pretty insightful stuff. So 1983. 1983 was the year that Dr. Earl Peterson, who you heard last night, worked out a contract, a long-range contract with a couple of young professors. They were at Cornell University. Dick Quass, John Pollock. The only way, Dick never changed. The only way you can tell Dick is young is he had a dark mustache here. You can see that. Anyway, at the time, they were some of the leading scientists in the country in the area of genetic evaluation. Earl Peterson commissioned them to run a best linear unbiased prediction of BLUP analysis on our data. Okay, remember, Henderson came to Cornell. Henderson went to Cornell, so Henderson was here. These two learned at the knee of Henderson. They employed, as far as I understand, that was the first BLUP on a large data set the size of the American Simmental Association. Now, it isn't large by today's standards. Today we have 17 million animals in the database. Back then we had about probably 1 million animals in the database. But for BLUP, the technology of BLUP was actually, BLUP was developed, the methodology was developed back in the late 60s. So to get it, and this is already into the we're talking into the 80s. It was into the 80s before we had a computer big enough to actually run that methodology on a reasonably large size database. So anyway, and these two actually had to come up with a trick. They call it the reduced animal model to even get BLUP to work on that size of database. So anyway, that ushered in what I think could be called one of the most productive runs in the history of beef cattle breeding. These two at Cornell University and their graduate students and their postdoctoral students shepherded the ASA genetic evaluation system for many, many years. We had a unique relationship with Cornell. There were several universities doing genetic evaluation during this time. However, they dealt with several breed associations. Cornell only had us. We had an exclusive arrangement with Cornell, and along with that exclusive arrangement went IP ownership. So we owned the IP, we shared the IP with Cornell, which also will later have implications. So now I want to give a shout out. To a number of organizations and people that have had a significant impact on our genetic improvement. And as Dr. Hatfield spoke earlier, we are privileged, absolutely privileged, to reside in the state of Montana. We have a very strong university right here in our backyard, Montana State University. Down the road, about 4 hours to the east, we have the USDA Fort Keogh Research Institution. So I went back and pulled some pictures from people that have had an impact on our genetic evaluation system. I missed a couple when I saw Patrick's slides, Ray Woodward. I shouldn't have missed Butch Whitman, who was at MSU on faculty, also worked for us. But I tried to gather up the people that have had an impact, and as Dr. Hatfield said, he's a sheep guy, so he hasn't been involved with us, but I just wanted to give him notice that now he's a department head. We're going to be coming after resources. So anyway, if you look across here, Dr. Don Kress, animal breeder, faculty member, Montana State for a number of years. I don't know if he's here. If he's not here, I think he's coming. He signed up anyway. Down here, Mike Tess was at the grand opening last night. Mike Tess still helps us out. Mike Tess manages the largest cooperator in our carcass merit program, the Bear Ranch. Dr. Mike McNeil, I talked about economic selection indexes. Mike McNeil was at the USDA back in 2005 when we collaborated with him to develop our API and TI. Over here, Dr. John Patterson, he was here last night. I don't know if he's here. These guys maybe have a hard time getting up that early anymore. But anyway, JP, as we know him, John Patterson, much help over the years. Right here, Rachel Endicott. Rachel Endicott, I call Rachel up about every 6 months, say, you got a crack student over there, and she sends me the best. So we've been populated with MSU students for many years. In fact, our first 2 EVPs had connection to Montana State. So all in all, like I say, we have been greatly blessed by the fact that we reside in one of the best beef states with these kinds of resources, one of the best beef states in the entire country. So now I'm going to give a shout out to a few people I'm going to call the stalwarts. I'm not going to give you a time frame or an exact date. I'm just going to say that a couple of these guys served a long time, and I'm going to call them the gatherers. And they are these 2 fellows, Jerry Litzy and Marty Robb. Why do I call them the gatherers? Because perhaps more than anybody in our history, they were stalwarts when it came to collecting data. They started the carcass merit program. They were just fiends when it came to collecting any kind of data they could get their hands on. I remember going back, I wanted to look back through history and look at the data flow that came in for mature weights. Look, there wasn't much for mature weights, and then there was like a spike for 2 years. Wonder what the heck was going on there? It was just spiked way up. Well, Jerry and Marty had run around the country and weighed cows. So they were fiends when it came to collecting data. And it was so refreshing to come out here to Bozeman, to ASA, and be able to work with people that had as much conviction and interest in data as I did, maybe even more. Now I'm going to give a shout out to somebody that I'd say the time frame is forever. Seems like that anyway. I'm going to call him the shepherd. The shepherd has watched over our database since the beginning of time. That's this guy. So for 43 years, Steve McGuire, who is actually a trained engineer, has watched over our database. I am very certain there is no one in the breed association world that has shepherded over a database for that period of time. And let's face it, our database is our most valuable asset. Our people certainly are, after our people, our database, most valuable asset that we have. And it's been very comforting to have somebody like Steve McGuire serve over that entire period. So now I'm going to move on to a section I'm calling a glimpse of the future through a glimpse of the past. So this was somewhere in the 80s. This is a group of graduate students at Cornell University. Over here you've got Dick Quass, you've got John Pollock. This is a guy named Dale Van Vleck, also quite prodigious in the world of animal breeding. Then you've got a guy right in the middle here that would go on to have a sizable impact on what we're doing and a sizable impact on what we're going to be doing. You're going to be hearing from him later. His name is Dorian Garrick. Now, I strategically placed these logos, these Cornell University logos, because when I asked Dorian for a picture of himself back in graduate school, he couldn't come up with a picture that didn't have beer in it. So I exposed him. You can rest assured, knowing Dorian, he got his fair share of that beer, too. Anyway, another slide with a glimpse of the past, or glimpse of the future through the past. The Red Angus Association of America, we are partners with in genetic evaluation, worked with Colorado State for decades. Much similar relationship to what we had with Cornell, although they never had a unique or an exclusive arrangement with Colorado State. But if you were at Colorado State, you sure recognized that the Red Angus was the focus of Colorado State. I don't think there's much question about that. Anyway, there were the two primary faculty members that started this relationship with Red Angus, a guy named Rick Borden, a guy named Jim Brinks. Rick Borden was my advisor. Jim Brinks was on my committee. These two were very practical geneticists, very practical. They had their own cow herds. Jim Brinks developed his own composite. He called it Cash. Rick Borden was a Red Angus breeder. They were fixated on cow herd traits too, at a time when that wasn't very popular. And I think that explains why Red Angus got so far ahead of everybody when it came to cow herd traits. They were the first with stayability. They were the first with heifer pregnancy. They were first with maintenance energy. Okay? That's because of these guys. But they also had an ace in the hole. They had a guy named Bruce Golden, who was just a graduate student at the time. And as I've said in the past, Bruce Golden was a savant when it came to making things happen on a computer. Bruce Golden was a savant. And you could see that all the way back in graduate school. So this is back in the mid-'80s, when the big goal is to turn this methodology developed by Henderson into computer code to where the rubber meets the road, so you can actually use it in the real world. Bruce Golden, timing, was everything there. He had the skill set, and he brought a lot of that technology to bear because of his ability to make the computer do things most others couldn't do. He went on to found CSU CGEL, Center for Genetic Evaluation of Livestock. And many, many positive things came out of that. So 1997 was not the moon landing. It was not the moon landing, but in the world of animal breeding, it probably was about as impactful as the moon landing. What happened? Can anybody tell me what happened in 1997 that was so seminal that it was equivalent to a moon landing in animal breeding? Multi-breed genetic evaluation was developed. 1997, the American Simmental Association, Cornell University teamed up to publish the world's first multi-breed genetic evaluation. At the time, we really didn't know. Maybe some of you are going to claim to know what would all unfold, and maybe you did. I certainly didn't. Steve will tell you, Steve McGuire, who was there through the whole show, will tell you that the primary reason we did this at that time is we had we were still in the upgrading process. We had half bloods and 3/4 bloods and so forth, and we knew we weren't doing a good job of evaluating them, so we developed multi-breed evaluation. And at the time, there probably wasn't the thought of going the other direction. I mean, that would have been almost sacrilegious. We were thinking about, you've got to get to purebred. Now, our mindset's a little different. Anyway, the seminal event in the world of animal breeding. So, then in 2001, we're getting feedback from the industry saying that universities aren't going to do this stuff anymore. We're not going to do genetic evaluation, production genetic evaluation. Frankly, the money got sucked into genomics, which would have made Monty happy if he was around back then. So there was an organization. It was basically funded by earmark money. Dave Nichols, he went to Washington along with a few others, and you know how thick Dave can lay it on. Well, he laid it on pretty thick. And we got federally funded to the tune, Dorian tells me, about $480,000 a year for the purpose of advancing genetic evaluation. We had 4 universities that were primarily in on it: Iowa State, Colorado State, Cornell, and Georgia. Okay? That was wonderful stuff, especially at a time when universities were talking about pulling in their reins. They were pulling in their reins, so it was great that we had this federal funding source. Unfortunately, that federal funding source came to an end. Remember back when all the fighting about earmarks? Well, this was an earmark, and so it went bye-bye. Now, towards the end of this organization's life, well, it still exists. It does not get funded. Dorian Garrick, sitting back there, was the executive director. He found ways to get some money trickling in. He was able to use some of that funding to fund Madi Sachi, who ended up working in our industry, in the beef industry, and developed MBVs for a lot of us. But the federal funding is gone. It's gone. So, in an effort to better utilize our resources, the NBCEC sent out an invitation to breeds and said, would you like to participate in this group effort? We're going to have this group effort, and the goal was this, to do multi-breed genetic evaluation. It was called the 6-breed joint venture. There are actually 7 breeds there, but these 2 came in together, the Devons and the Salers. And we went to meeting after meeting after meeting in Denver. We had a moderator, a strategic planning fellow. And for reasons I'm not going to go into, it just didn't happen. It never materialized, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I don't know. Then back in 2010, two of the larger breed associations in the U.S., the Red Angus Association of America and the American Simmental Association, got together. And the way it actually happened is Red Angus was interested in doing multi-breed evaluation. We had been doing it for a long time. We'd already even taken it in-house. 2005 or 6 was the year that we went in-house. Cornell had lost, well, Dick and John were on their way out. So we brought the evaluation in-house. They came to us. Red Angus came to us. Can you do an evaluation for us? We said, certainly, but the only way we'll do it is if we combine databases. We only make one run. They said, I think we can live with that. So we did it. We forged a relationship that is predicated on the ASA continuing to do the production runs. We make the production runs. And we have a joint committee that shares in the decision-making of what direction we're going to go with genetic evaluation. And Red Angus shares, to some degree, financially in furthering our R&D. So for those of you from Colorado, you may recognize this tunnel. This tunnel, anybody tell me where that tunnel is? Willie, do you know where that is?
Highway 14.
That's Poudre Canyon, up Poudre Canyon. Yep. And I thought this was pretty appropriate because when we entered into this agreement, and if you've ever been on this, kind of a treacherous, a lot of switchbacks, you're driving up, you get to this tunnel, you don't know what's on the other side of that tunnel.
It's okay when you're sober.
I never tried that, Willie. So anyway, we didn't know what was on the other side of that tunnel. So here's the other side of that tunnel. The other side of that tunnel turned out to be International Genetic Solutions. Will Townsend, sitting in the back there, actually coined that name, International Genetic Solutions. What is International Genetic Solutions? We get asked that all the time. What is it? Well, I think this best describes it. It's an unprecedented collaboration between breed associations to enhance beef industry profitability. Now, unprecedented in the world of breed associations, saying it's an unprecedented collaboration isn't exactly jumping up and down, because let's face it, breed associations have a history of feuding like the Hatfields and McCoys. But in this case, this is truly, when you talk about what is at the core of we breed associations, our databases and our genetic evaluation, sharing that, collaborating on that, that is extraordinary. That is extraordinary. Now, IGS is not only limited to genetic evaluation. We collaborate in other areas. NCBA, we had a big area for booths. We set up our booths. We flew the banner of IGS over the top of our booth. So there's a lot of areas of collaboration we breed associations can work together in or work and move towards. But where we started was this idea of genetic evaluation. So what is IGS physically? Well, it's the world's largest genetic evaluation. Yes, it's bigger than Angus. It's bigger than Angus. Has 12 breed association databases. Our cousins up in the north, Canadian Simmental, all the way down through Shorthorn, Manitou, Chianina, Canadian Angus, American Canadian Gelbvieh, American Canadian Limousin. They're all in there. They're all in there. That brings us to, Steve just told me, 17 million animals. 17 million animals. We take in somewhere north of 340,000 new records every year. So what does that do? Well, in a nutshell, really delivers on our vision to collaborate and focus on commercial profitability. We know we work together, we work better together. We can accomplish more together. So that's the collaboration part. Focusing on the commercial cattle industry What IGS does is it encourages crossbreeding, facilitates and encourages crossbreeding, increases information for genetic prediction. In the old days, every one of those breed associations would have done separate genetic evaluation. Well, there are sires and related animals that would be used throughout all of those 12 databases. If we did all those evaluations separately, we're not going to have nearly as much accuracy as if we combine them all together. Pool resources for technological advancement. In this era, when universities have stepped out of this arena, they're not going to be spending in this area. We have to be better shepherds of our resources. We flat have to be better shepherds of our resources to continue to stay on the cutting edge. And with this model, we're more able to do that. And finally, and I hope, it does increase the integration of technology. In a sense, I think anything that makes life easier for commercial cattlemen will enhance the integration of technology, and I would like to think this makes life easier for commercial cattlemen. So where's the future? Well, we know where the next exit is, and that next exit started January of 2014. We called it Operation Quantum Leap. Operation Quantum Leap was this. It's an effort to create and advance the next generation of genetic evaluation to heights never seen before and anywhere, and I emphasize anywhere, across any species. The two founders of the two primary scientists involved in this project, who you will hear from later, Dorian Garrick and Bruce Golden, this is their mission. This is their mission. And they have achieved it. They've actually achieved it. So, Operation Quantum Leap evolved a new company, a company called Theta Solutions. Theta Solutions is the vehicle that allows the sustainability of this genetic evaluation system. In the past, what typically happened, software was created, that was it. Then you'd go along, maybe every 3, 4, 5 years, there'd be a little bit of improvement, a little bit of tweaking here and there. This effort is a prolonged, sustained effort to advance the technology, and through licensing, Bruce and Dorian are convinced, and I think they are on track, that by licensing the software, they will be able to continue a sustained effort in advancing their product. They call it BOLT. It stands for Biometric Open Language Tools, but it's pretty dang fast. It's the fastest software in existence. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, what's the big deal? It just means that you get your genetic evaluation finishes sooner. Who cares? The speed has a lot to do. There is methodology in animal breeding that simply couldn't be comprehended. Even to this day, couldn't be comprehended before BOLT came along. Because of the efficiencies and the speed of the software, things can be done that were previously unconceivable. Okay? And they'll be talking in the future, the speakers later today talking about the future will fill you in more about that. Our team, right here, we've got Dr. Lauren Hyde, who came to us about 6 years ago, Lauren. That'd be about right. 6 years ago, she's a CSU grad. Tremendous addition to the team. Dr. Madi Sachi worked with PIC. Worked previously to that, worked at Iowa State, funded partially on funds from the NBCEC, worked along with Dorian Garrick, did a lot of work for breed associations to incorporate genomics. So we had DNA-enhanced EPDs. I'm involved a little bit. Steve, the shepherd, still involved a lot. still involved a lot, and that delivers the product to IGS. So I'll close with this slide. This is what we see as the future. I think we positioned ourselves very well. That doesn't mean we can rest on our laurels. We have to continue to beat away and move as fast and as effectively as we can. And I think we have a model here that will allow us to do that. So with that, I will pass the baton over to Jackie. To Lauren, sorry.
Okay, good morning. Okay, before we're going to start getting into more of the educational part, Wade's thing was kind of like more fluff, kind of like a cheerleading thing. But before we get into this, I had a pretty tough time getting here yesterday. I was stuck in the airport for a while, and probably I got to the airport about 10:30 yesterday. I didn't get here till 9 o'clock at night. So of course, after Paulette picked me up, had to head to the bar, to have a calming down drink. So Paulette and Nancy Tom and I were sitting there talking, and all of us being single, we're talking a little bit about men, and I looked at these slides and I thought, this is kind of what we're thinking now, okay, what's the optimum number of volts for my battery? I don't know. I prefer one. Paulette, I'm not sure about you. Paulette, do you like to stick with those proven older ones, or do you want to try some young ones? Okay, and Bruce Holmquist, I think you're single too, so this last one might pertain to you. How many females are you going to be keeping as replacement? So, really, if you think about this more in terms of, of beef cattle, what you're really trying to do, the underlying thing that happens when you make these kinds of decisions is that you are maximizing the rate of genetic change. And Jackie's going to talk to you a little bit about the components that we use to maximize genetic change. So I'll just give it to her, and then I'll be back to finish off this.
A few minutes, yeah.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah, so really, there's only 4 things that are going to affect the rate of genetic change. And I put up here, in parentheses, progress. I hope that those genetic selection decisions that we're making result in progress. You can make change, but is that change going in the right direction? And we'll come back to that later on. But really, if we want to maximize the speed that we're making genetic progress, these 4 factors are the only 4 factors that affect that rate. And obviously you can make genetic change and that progress is good, but if you make faster progress and if it's going in the right direction, that should be even better, right? So there's 3 components that are directly proportional to the rate of change: the accuracy of the piece of information you're using to make your decision, the selection criteria, the selection intensity is directly proportionate to the rate of change. If you're picking the top 1% versus the top 50%, you're going to see faster change. And then the variation of the genetics in the population you're selecting from. If there's not much variation in that population, you can't make change very fast, right? If all animals are black and you want to make them black, they're black. You're not going to change anything. So if you're selecting on coat color. So there's one component that's inversely related to the rate of change, and that's the generation interval. So how long you're keeping those genetics in your herd. If you're trying to make change with genetics that you chose 10 years ago, you're not going to make very fast change compared to genetics, hopefully, that you chose a couple years ago should be better if you're doing your job right. So this rate of genetic change is called the key equation. And I'll preface this talk, for those of you who don't know me, I'm a reproductive physiologist. I like to palpate cows. I like to talk about hormones. I don't have a background in statistics. I don't do a lot of equations. But coming under Wade's tutelage, I'm trying to learn a little bit more. But anyway, so here's my equation. Somebody else would have math figures up here, but I have pictures. So the rate at which we can make genetic progress is equal to the accuracy of the piece of information that you are using to make that decision. So how close that piece of information gets you to the animal's true breeding value. You multiply that by your selection intensity. You know that old choosy moms choose Jeff? How choosy are you about the animals you're picking as your parents? And then you multiply that by the variation in the population. Again, if there's not much difference in the population, it's hard to make much progress. But if there's quite a bit of variation and you're selecting from the top tier, then you can make progress faster. We divide all of that by the amount of time it takes to replace one generation with the next. So we're going to talk about each of these components in a little bit more detail in my portion of the talk, and then Lauren's going to share with us some trade-offs. You can't always maximize every component of that equation. So accuracy of selection, I think we'll hear some more about this later today, but it's the strength of the relationship between the true breeding value of those animals and the prediction that you're using for that particular trait. It increases when you use better predictions. That, to me, is pretty self-explanatory. If you're trying to make improvements in calving needs, your best prediction of that particular trait is an EPD for calving needs for that trait that you're trying to select for. It's much better than birth weight EPD, and it's far better than an animal's own birth weight. And so trying to use the most accurate piece of information in that part of the equation is key to making genetic progress faster. If you're using an animal's own phenotype, the accuracy is based on the heritability of that particular trait, and more heritable traits would be more accurate. So if you've got something like fertility, which is heavily influenced by environmental traits, and it's a pretty lowly heritable trait, that's a tough one to make progress on just based on an animal's own phenotype. But traits that are higher in heritability, you can make progress faster in that instance. It's still not going to compete with estimated breeding, estimated EPDs. Sorry, my mind is
So I'd like to throw this one. I'd like to throw a question at you, Jackie.
Oh, thanks, Wade.
So, it's the least I could do for Lauren telling me I'm just fluff. Anyway.
You should ask Lauren a question.
Oh, I will. So, anyway, when you talk about, you talked about lowly heritable traits and highly heritable traits, and that with lowly heritable traits, you're not going to make as much progress with using phenotypes, and you went right to fertility.
Mm-hmm.
So, what does that mean to somebody if they're culling their open cows? That's the phenotype. They're either bred or open. Are you going to make lots of progress or not much progress culling open cows? Genetic progress.
Yeah. So that's the key, is genetic progress. If you think you're making big genetic progress by culling an open cow, that maybe 90% of your cows get bred and 10% of them are open. There's a lot of reasons why the ones that got bred, and the ones that didn't get bred, didn't. And they're not all genetic reasons. So it's a tough way to make fast genetic change. The other problem with that, which I've been reading in my textbook, because I'm trying to become a better animal breeder, is with traits like pregnancy, where you're either pregnant or not, which, by the way, I am, this baby bump. There's a lot of, even the genetic component, there's a lot of genes involved in that, and if you have 90% of the animals that get pregnant by the end of the breeding season, it's still hard to find the most fertile animals in those 90%. And so it's really not a fast way to make genetic progress. Traits like stability that have an EPD associated with them, that's a lot faster way to get to whether or not that animal is going to stay in your herd. But really, with lowly heritable traits, there's a lot of environmental influences that contribute to that phenotype.
Yeah, so I would go ahead.
Okay. We'll figure out the mics on our break. But so if you're using an EPD, the accuracy is related to the BIF accuracy that's reported in that EPD, but that's not true accuracy. And I've heard Dorian talk about this. I'm not sure what the philosophy was behind why there's a BIF accuracy versus a true accuracy. But anyway, if you go back to that key equation, you can't just plug in the accuracy you see on herd book associated with that EPD. You have to do some calculations to change it to true accuracy. But the point is, for everybody to walk home with, is anything that you do to improve the accuracy associated with that EPD is going to help you make faster change. So things like DNA testing and progeny testing and accurate data, contemporary group design, all of that will help make genetic change faster. So here's an example. This really isn't very important what these numbers are, but I'm giving them to you so you can see, where we set these metrics for the key equation. Oops, and that got a little fuddled in the download. But anyway, so if we have a hypothetical situation where we're looking to improve our weaning weight in our next generations, and we've got some young bulls with a BIF accuracy of 10% associated with their weaning weight EPD. We use these metrics. We're picking the top 1%, and there's a genetic variation of 35 pounds and an intergeneration interval of 5 years. 10% BIF accuracy will improve weaning weight by 8.2 pounds per year. Now, if you forget this line that's covering up that part of the table, if we use genomics and we bring our accuracy associated with the EPD up to 25%, you can see an improvement in weaning weight up to 12.3 pounds per year. And so that boosts us 4 pounds per year. And you might be thinking, gosh, that's not very much. But the beauty of EPDs is you get accuracy improvements across all these traits. So it's a bit like crossbreeding. Crossbred female, they have improved fertility, they have improved calf survival, they see tick up in weaning weight, tick up in number of calves per year in her life. There's all these traits that you see a little bit of improvement on. And any one of those is not overwhelming. But when you combine them, you see an improvement in that cow's production of 25%. So it's similar in that regard. If you look at all these traits that you see an improvement in your accuracy levels of the EPDs when you're using genomics, then you can make far better decisions on those animals than without that information. And I think we'll hear a lot about genomics today, so I think you'll expand on that some. So anyway, the second component in the key equation is how choosy you are with your future parents. you know, it's kind of a continuum. If you have lower selection intensity on the left here to higher selection intensity on the right, the lowest you could get would be just selecting at random. You don't really, or you aren't really selecting for the trait of interest. And really going back to that fertility question, if you're culling all your opens and you're trying to keep from the bred animals, within those animals that got pregnant, it's really kind of a random selection of fertility within that group. And then, you know, most choosy would be selecting from the top tier animals. So this is a scan of Rick Gordon's book, because I'm still a student, and this is a coffee stain right there, because I drink a lot of coffee when I read books. But this is just a graphical representation of this, and there's equations to calculate the actual intensity from how choosy you're being. But if this is a represented bell curve of all the animals that you have to choose from for the parents, and here's the average, you know, breeding value or selection criteria for the trait that you're interested in among those animals. And if you pick the top 20%, here's your average breeding value of the parents that you've chosen. And so it's the selection intensity is the difference between these two averages divided by the standard deviation. You don't have to do those calculations. You can find a table of them. If you're interested, I can email them to you. If you're going to keep your top 1%, your selection intensity is 2.67 and on down. So, assuming we have an accuracy of selection of 50%, and we hold all our other metrics equal to what we talked about in the previous example, if we select for the top 1%, top 10%, or top 50% of the animals for a weaning weight EPD, we would see an increase in 2.8 pounds per year if you're selecting from the top 50%, so you're not being very choosy. If you increase that pickiness to 10%, top to 10%, you'll see a rise in pounds per year to 6.2 pounds. And if you really select heavily, then you'll see an increase to 9.3 pounds. So, you know, I think it's pretty easy to see how these can all kind of combine to get you that genetic progress faster. So this is a slide that Wade shared with us. It's got some older data. It's the genetic improvement that was made from 2000 to 2008. And in the graph on the left, this is improvement in API. So change in API, you know, dollar per exposure. And so these, the figures used in the Simmental population, the Angus population, the Hereford population, and the Charolais population, you took the MARC data, right? For to calculate an API on the population average.
The genetic trends in their populations over those years.
Okay, yeah. So took the genetic trends of the whole, you know, the whole Simmental population, the whole Angus population, the whole Hereford, whole Charolais. Took those trends and plugged them into the API calculation, and here's what we saw. Simmental made the largest change, the largest improvement in API during that time period of $16 per exposure, followed by the Angus, Hereford, and Charolais. Now, that was the actual change. If we take that actual change, we rescaled this graph, Wade rescaled this graph. So here's the $16 change that we saw during that time period. We set that as the actual change. If breeders had selected from the top 5% API animals during that time period, we could have seen a over $30 change during that time window. Had we selected from the top 1%, during that time period, we could have seen over a $40 change during that time period. So this goes to show, you know, we can make progress, and progress is good, but there's a potential to make faster progress as well. And again, if you're going in the right direction, faster should improve. So, talk about genetic variation. And just backing up here, these are 2 heifer calves born the same year. And you can see quite a bit of variation in those 2 calves, right? So genetic variation is the variability of the breeding values within a population that you're selecting from. This is tough to change by individual breeders. You can use outbreeding to increase genetic variation or inbreeding to decrease genetic variation, but otherwise you as individuals don't have very much control over the variation in the Simmental population. So it's a harder one to make changes other than without crossing and inbreed. So generation interval, and I gotta tell you, I'm kind of sad. I was looking for a picture of my girls and myself and my mom, and I realized I don't have one. So this talk made me realize that I need to get one of those. But anyway, I don't know who these people are. Nice family, I'm sure. But the generation interval is the amount of time required to replace one generation with the next. Pretty straightforward. In a closed population, it's the average age of the parents when their selected offspring are born. In cattle, it's typically 4 to 6 years. And we're going to switch gears, and Wade, you can save all your hard questions for Lauren, I'm sure. But as you can imagine, there's a lot of trade-offs between between the accuracy and your selection intensity, or accuracy and, is that what I'm trying to say? No. Anyway, Lauren's going to talk about it. I'm going to sit down. Thanks, Lauren.
Okay, remember how with the rate of genetic change there are, okay, accuracy, selection intensity, genetic variation. Those are all on the numerator of the quotient, and the generation interval is on the bottom. Okay, so any increase in accuracy, any increase in accuracy, selection intensity, genetic variation, increase in those is that's gonna improve the rate, right? Okay, but since generation interval is on the denominator, a decrease in that one will increase the rate of genetic change. Okay, so remember that while we go through this. Okay, so there are several different trade-offs between these 4 components. Okay, and one of them is the trade-off between accuracy and generation interval. So a decrease in generation interval, which is going to be increasing the rate of genetic change, can sometimes be offset by a decrease in accuracy, and then vice versa. Okay, and an example of this would be, suppose that you can either, just use the same bull year after year after year after year. Like say somebody in this room is, has been using Parisian and his semen for, since what, 1970? Is that when he came here? Okay. That would be like a really slow turnover. But suppose that instead you just want a really quick turnover. Suppose that you just wanted to, every year you're going to just, change bulls. Okay, you're just going to change herd sires. What happens in this case is that if you just use a bull for 1 year, you're not going to have very many progeny out of that bull, right? So what's that going to do to your accuracy? Exactly, it's going to decrease your accuracy. So you're not going to get any well-evaluated, progeny-tested bulls out of this, okay? So that's one of the trade-offs that you see, but so there is kind of an optimum. You don't want to, settle with using the same bull year after year after year. you know, but you also don't really necessarily want to switch gears. Okay? Okay, another trade-off would be between accuracy and selection intensity. Now in this case, you know, a decrease in intensity may be accompanied by an increase in accuracy and vice versa. And Brian DeFries, are you here?
Yeah.
Okay, you run the bull test at Purdue, correct?
No,
Oh, I thought you did.
I don't run it, I'm involved in it.
Okay, but in this bull test, so you just have like, you know, economics kind of govern what the number of calves that you can have, right? Like you can only have maybe, say, you know, oh, I don't know, 100.
220 in the bull
Okay,
test,
okay,
about
220.
230
Okay.
spades.
Okay, so you all have to kind of come up with an optimum. Do you want to test fewer bulls but get more progeny out of those bulls? Or do you want to have more bulls to test but get fewer progeny? Okay, the fewer the bulls that you have, you're going to get more progeny, so you decrease your selection intensity, but you're going to get improved accuracy on those few bulls. But in the other scenario, if you want to test more bulls, but just have fewer progeny per bull, you're going to increase your intensity, but decrease your accuracy. Okay, so you follow? Okay. Okay, so that's another one. Another trade-off would be between selection intensity versus risk. And although selection risk isn't really, you know, one of those components, it is related to accuracy. Basically, selection risk is just that the risk that the true genetic merit of your replacements is way worse than what you thought, okay? Okay, with males, okay, you can, you know, pick just one or a few bulls, okay? If they're low accuracy, you know, you're going to be putting all your eggs in one basket, okay? So if you just have a couple bulls and, you know, maybe, you know, they have like 30% accuracy for certain traits, okay? You're accepting a lot of risk in there. But if you select more bulls at that 30% accuracy, you're probably, you know, overall that the average is kind of going to be closer to maybe to what you expect, okay? With more sires, you'll decrease your intensity, you become less choosy, but you do reduce your risk, okay? It's kind of like, in a way, it's kind of like the opposite of internet dating, I think, okay? Like with more sires, like you have this internet dating situation, you have all these like people to choose from, you know, but I think, you know, you're going to wind up having a lot more risk in that kind of situation, I think, because you know, you really don't know what's going on there. But I think that you know, you can. I kind of forgot what I was going to say. Okay, we'll just keep going. Okay, with females, the selection intensity versus risk is really not that much of an issue because we keep so many more females than males. And essentially, their mean breeding value, because there are so many, is probably going to be pretty much what is expected. They're not going to deviate so much from the norm, okay? Okay, the next trade-off would be selection intensity versus generation interval. So an increase in intensity when that's associated with an increase in generation interval, hey, that's cool. You're that is a trade-off. You're increasing the selection intensity, increasing generation interval. So it's, you know, the kind of opposite side of the coin. With males, that's generally not an issue because we keep very few males, and we can replace them very quickly and intensely. But with females, it's a different thing. We have to think, what is the optimal replacement rate for these females? And that just depends on what sires were used on the set of cows to create these replacements, okay? If the bulls were far superior to the dams, then we would probably want to keep more of those replacements. And I'll show you a graphic here in a second. But if the sires are only marginally better, we're just going to select a few of them, but we can be more choosy, okay? And I'll just show you a graphic here. Let's see. Okay, on the top graph here, this is when the sires are actually a lot better than the dams. Like, say that this is the average breeding value of the sires that were, sire or group of sires that was used on the dams. Okay, remember, if you just are, assuming that on average the progeny will be the average of the sire and dams breeding value. Okay, the average for these potential replacement females is right here. So, you don't want these dams anymore who are way off on this side. You're going to select more from this group, right? Okay, and then down here, I don't know how many of you in BAT can see this graph, but this is only when the sires are just slightly better than the dams. Here's the average breeding value of the group of dams. Here's average breeding value of the sire or sires. Their progeny average is just going to be right here. You don't have to replace as many dams because the daughters are just a little bit better. So you could be more selective in how you choose your dams or your replacements. Okay, so you got that. Okay, and just a little bit more about selection. We'll go into something else here. I've talked a lot about differences between the male and female selection. Male selection is much more important. Just ask Paulette. Fewer bulls are needed. So you can be very intense with your selection. You can really, make some, look at all the data, make some good choices and stuff. The sires are capable of having a lot more progeny, so of course they're going to have high accuracy. There's so many, that's why we have, I used to have printed sire summaries rather than dam summaries. That's one reason. And AI will magnify the situation, and as as Jackie explained too, DNA is really going to have a powerful impact, especially on the young bulls. It's increasing their accuracy. Okay, so with that, I'm going to leave this to someone. Wade, would you like to talk about this, or Jackie? I don't know whose slide this is. Okay.
Can you tell we all got together ahead of time?
We were supposed to.
And Lauren didn't come in until 9. So, all right, so this kind of goes back to my point that I brought up earlier. You can make change, but change doesn't always mean it's in the right direction. Change doesn't always mean it's a good thing. So keep in mind, in all these selection decisions, you want to be making progress, right? And so, obviously, the traits you use to make that selection decision are key to whether or not you're making progress. And there's a lot of traits to choose from, and we all look at Wade because this is near and dear to his heart, but really, we all feel strongly about this. If you want to make progress, single trait selection is not a good idea. Selecting on just growth EPDs, is not a good idea, right, Marty? Yeah, okay. So the best thing to do this is a balanced approach, and there's these lovely things called economic indexes that have been developed to try and maximize profit selection. And so people say, well, you're not supposed to use single trait selection, so why would you just select on an index? An index is not a single trait selection. It's finding the sweet spot among all these different EPDs that will bring home the most profit for an animal. And so anyway, we really recommend people use these economic indexes, the all-purpose index and terminal index, to select for profit. And so last year at Fall Focus, we spent quite a bit of time discussing what traits go into these economic indexes. And here's a pyramid that shows you kind of the relative weight of importance of the traits in the all-purpose index. So we hear, yield grade and salvage value of milk get selected against, but that's not true. They're just not weighted as heavily in an index. So all these traits within here are economically relevant traits for a commercial cow herd. We hear things like weaning weight are selected against in an economic index. That's not true. It's just not selected as heavily or weighted as heavily as the traits higher up in this pyramid. Stability, going back to that fertility issue and probably soundness issue and other reasons why you would cull animals from your herd. If a sire's progeny stays in the herd longer, even though that increases your generation interval, it has a big impact on the profit of that herd. And so optimizing stability is key to a profitable operation. So the other thing that I think there's some misconceptions about is that an all-purpose index selects for one particular kind of animal. Somebody saw a high API bull and it had low growth traits, so then they assume all high API bulls will have low growth rates. It's not true. Again, it's trying to find a balance among all these traits, and you get, weighted differently for different traits that are more important to that profitability. But within the top 1% of API bulls, which was about, what was that weight, 80 bulls?
I think so, yeah.
Here's the average EPD for those top 1% bulls. Calving is, 16.1, I don't know, hopefully everybody can read these numbers. You can see the percentile ranking across those different traits. And again, stability and was high. You expect those bulls to be high percentile rank. Growth traits were lower in that pyramid, and you can see that emphasis here. But what's maybe not more important, but what's kind of interesting is you can find a wide range within each one of these EPDs across the top 1% API bulls. So if you pick a high indexing bull and select for, make sure that you're getting the cavities that you need, or make sure that you're getting the other traits, bringing those along, you can be pretty successful. And that variation exists within high indexing bulls. And there's some great search tools on HerdBook where you can search among high indexing animals, select your EPDs to whatever level you want them at, and you can come up with a list to choose from, and it's pretty effective. And I think that's all we had. So any questions from the audience?
On that pyramid where it's weighted, marked API, where's birth weight and cavities?
So these are what we call economically relevant traits, and they're traits that if you're an accountant, you would need to have to calculate profit. So birth weight isn't gonna, if you had a list of birth weights of your calves, that won't tell your accountant anything about profit. Even calving ease won't tell your accountant necessarily anything directly about a profit, but there's something up on here, calf survival, right here, That's the economically relevant trait. Now, how do we get at that? Through what you just talked about, through cavities. It's in there. It's in there. So when you see on this list, we have EPDs outside of these traits, but these are the traits in an economic index. You have to have the traits that you can put accounting to, survival rate. So how do we figure out the pounds of calves, the pound of calf that's gonna come out of a cow-calf operation? Well, one is survival rate. You've got 100 cows. You got 100 cows, and your survival rates to weaning is 95%. You got 95 calves, right? Then what else do we need? The count would need one more thing besides survival rate to get the amount of calves, pounds of calves coming out of your cow herd. What's the other thing? Weaning weight, yeah. So between those two things, if we have survival rate, which we predict through calving ease and maternal calving ease both, if we have that, and we know, and we have weaning weight, we can come up with the pounds of calves that come out of a cow-calf operation. So really, as I always say, it's just genetic accounting. It's not magic, it's genetic accounting. And if you think, I think one of the keys to cattle breeding is converting our mindset. We're all used to collecting all kinds of biological traits. I mean, you can measure tons of things on animals. In the old days, there was a guy named Carney Redmond. He was actually a Montanan from the east part of Montana. I mean, he would, Russ, you knew him, he'd measure everything you can measure on an animal. Well, those things maybe were related to profit. We don't know. But the reality is, when you're an animal breeder, when you're breeding animals, you have to think about economically relevant traits. And when you think along those lines, it really changes your mindset. These traits, it might have been Carney Redmond might have had some traits that were related to some economically relevant traits that an accountant could use, but they weren't economically relevant directly.
And on that slide there's no way, like on maternal calving ease on that minimum, that one bull there that's 2.5 on maternal calving ease.
Yep.
I don't know what percentile that is in the breed, but it's pretty
low.
Pretty low. Is there any way that can hammer on the API more, or it's just math is math? I mean, because we all know we don't want to use that bull.
Yeah, well, Tim gets to it brings us to a very valid discussion. So, if we were in a pig business, they don't bother about getting under the hood and saying, well, I won't accept an animal that's 2.5 for maternal calving ease. I just won't. They don't say that. They say that animal is top 1%. He's a highly valued boar. Well, in our world, we have to sell these bulls to people, and you might have a bull that might be in the top 1%, but you're cut for top 1% for API, but he's really low growth bull. Say he's in the bottom 1% for growth. Well, in the pig world, you'd still use that. And as time goes on, more and more of us will start using maybe low growth bulls, but we know if we have to sell bulls and 90% of our customers are going to look at that low growth yearling weight EPD, weaning weight EPD that's low, they're not going to buy them, then we have to get under the hood and say, well, I want top indexing API cattle, TI cattle, but I have to draw some lines from a practical standpoint. My customers just aren't going to buy bulls below 50% for growth, or wherever you draw the line, and for any trait. I mean, that's just the practical nature of what we have to deal with in the cattle business. That bull that's 2.5 for maternal calving ease, you can rest assured he looks pretty dang well. He looks pretty strong in probably many, many other areas, so he's made up that difference. The shortcomings being accounted for, the fact that his daughters are going to calve harder, but that shortcoming is more than accounted for by the other genetic levels that he has. But if your customer says, well, I'll never use a bull like that, then you can't sell him. And no matter how good he is, No matter how much profit he would deliver to your customer, if he doesn't buy the bull, it's not gonna matter. Yeah, Bob.
Raise your hands.
Give us a second, Bob.
Yeah.
So the folks on the computer can hear you.
Yeah, one comment about the mics is, for one thing, it's a big room, so make sure everybody in the audience hears.
Before Bob, okay.
And the other thing is, yeah, raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you. The other thing is we're recording this and actually, is it streaming live too? So just so our listening audience can hear, we ask that everybody grab a mic.
So before you say anything, Bob, I want to point out one thing. So on a trait, like you saw the pyramid, stability is at the top of the pyramid. I don't think anybody should be surprised by that. I mean, we've known for years that the longevity in your cows is the primary, that's the most important trait in a life cycle beef cattle production system. So when you look at a trait like stability, to get in the top 1%, you have to, they average the top 5% and look at the range. The range, the worst is 20, which is pretty good. I think that's about average. So what that's saying is that's a trait that's so important, it's so important that you can't be bottom basement in stability and get by. I mean, you're gonna, when it comes to stability, you're gonna have, in order to, stability is so important that if you're bottom basement, you just flat can't make up for it with the other traits. Now, some of the other traits that aren't quite as important as you go down the pyramid, you can be salvage weight or carcass weight, those kind of traits, you can be pretty low and not that hard to make those traits up, with superior performance in other traits. So Bob had something.
I thought you were going to ditch me there.
I remember.
No, I was just, some people might question what weaning weight being that low, but I mean, if you look at any data set over the last 10 to 20 years, no commercial producers is further increasing weaning weight because it plowed up against the environment. So it's just continuing to increase weaning weight, EPD. Commercial producers are not realizing that in the field in their pay weights. So, I mean, it makes sense that it's down there in the third tier and not up in the first tier in stability. Because if the commercial producers can't realize the performance that you're supplying them, you actually just get harder doing cattle that you're supplying them. So, I mean, if people are wondering the logic of that, that's the logic of that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that happens with growth, I mean, we went through decades where output was really all we considered. It was output, output, output. You couldn't have too much output. And growth was the major output we measured. So when we instituted API, and we saw that there were animals that were actually low growth animals that were at the top of the heap, that was like sacrilegious. Remember, Tom, so Shearforce comes along, Shearforce is a poster boy for that. Shearforce is not a high growth bull. Shearforce is a low growth bull. Under our old mindset where growth was king, we only really factored in output, Shearforce wouldn't have been used. But when we rationalized that growth is important, but in the whole life cycle of a production system, growth is lower on the totem pole, you're going to find those Shearforces and the 3C Wallies and those kind of bulls that still stack up to the top. But the beauty is, like I said, if you have commercial bull customers that absolutely say, I won't use a Shearforce, they're too low growth. I got to have the top 25% growth. You can have the top 25% growth and still have high API. You can be in the top 1% and have the top, I know there are bulls on that top 1% list that are top 1% for growth. They're there. And if that is your important trait to your customer, just modify accordingly. Yeah, Fred.
Wait, I don't know much about genetics, but I understand profitability in accounting. And if you just do a little math, if I had a 90% weaning percentage and they weighed 500 pounds, I'm going to get 45,000 pounds at $1. Let's say your commercial man takes $45,000 home. And I'm not talking about extremes here, but if you if I have an 86% weaning weight, or percentage, and they weigh 550 pounds, which is just 10% more, which is not extreme, that's reasonable. Your commercial man's going to take 47,500 pounds to market, or it's going to take $47,500 home, or at least 5% more money home. And up there on your growth, your winning weight's 50 is 50%. Your yearling, I believe, is 60-some percent. And I'm not, and I really don't understand all this so much, but it just seems to me there ought to be more weight to winning weight, because the average, most of our customers, that's what they really look to. So I challenge the accounting that the calves weigh more. Even if you have less calves, your commercial man is going to be better off.
Okay, so, I mean, there's no question that if you're just thinking about output, which is what most of us do at the coffee shop, we talk about, well, I just weaned my calves, they weighed 700 pounds, and, you know, they're going to gain you, you're going to have more revenue per calf than somebody that weans 500-pound calves. But what we're forgetting about in that whole process is the input end of the equation. You start thinking about the input end, typically you're talking about bigger cows with more maintenance requirements. You're talking about, and I was guilty as anybody of this. Somebody would come to buy bulls from me. There'd be a bull that had 30 more pounds of yearling weight than another bull, and I'd say, well, back then, I think just for easy figures, it's $1 a pound. So $1 a pound at 30 more pounds of yearling weight, that's going to give you 30 more bucks a calf, right? What I forgot about was that's not free. That extra growth, when we factor in what neutralizes the impact of growth, is that it doesn't come from thin air. That growth has a cost associated with it. If it's weaning weight, if it's weaning weight through milk, it has a sizable cost. That's a very inefficient way to put on growth. If it's weaning weight through grass, creep feed, and so forth, it's a little better. But anyway, when you factor in the extra growth, the cost of the extra growth, it doesn't mean growth isn't important, because it's still in. The bulls are still at least average. The top 1% API bulls are still average for growth. So like I said, there's going to be some bulls in there that are top 1%.
But wait, you got to pay for it one way or another. You either got to feed more cows or have a cow produce more weight. Because at the end of the day, all a commercial man has to sell is pounds. Yep. Those pounds either come from cows that eat a little less and have lighter calves, or cows that may eat a little bit more. And, you know, stayability is important, but stayability of not good quality is not important. You want stability of quality cows that produce calves that weigh. And there are a lot of cows that produce larger calves that are not necessarily the largest cows in your herd.
Yep, that is true. The correlation between cow size and weaning weight it's positive, but it's not all that strong. So it's true, you can have smaller cows that produce heavy weaned calves. But the math, and we're basing this on, we have cattle facts, prices and costs. We have prices and costs from cattle facts. And we have a biological model that spits out the answer. Now, there's been a lot of research too over the years, and I'm sure Rachel and many of you, John Hall sitting right next to her, are familiar with A lot of the research that comes out shows that smaller cows tend to be more profitable because it's a reproductive thing. You've got a set number of acres, you can get more cows, more calves on that set number of acres because of reproductive rate. The real key, if you want to jack up your growth, use maternal or terminal sires. If we were to show you the top 1% TI bulls, they'd be high. I mean, the growth rate on those would be very high because we don't have to worry about all of the other things. With API, we got to worry about reproductive rates, cow size, cow maintenance requirements, all the things we have to worry about in a cow herd. In a terminal sire, the beauty of a terminal sire is you don't have to worry about that stuff. Just like you're saying, pick the high growth bulls that have good carcass quality, you'll be fine. When it comes to a cow herd, when you start creeping up, the other thing associated with high growth is larger mature size. Your cows get bigger.
Well, I think for most of the customers I deal with who have small cow herds, they want a bull that can do it all. And so you've got to have curve benders, and they want a bull that's going to produce a calf, but they want more winning weight than to be in the bottom 50 percentile.
And they can have that. You can go to the top API bulls, you can find top 1% weaning weight, top 1% yearling weight. They're in there. They're there.
Jared Decker, University of Missouri. I'm glad this conversation has turned towards the genetic antagonism between growth and mature size. So the question that I have for you all is, so the other comment I'll make is at BIF, we heard about the importance of turning in mature cow weight records. So 2 questions for the group. 1, how many of you all are turning in mature cow weight records? And where is the association at in terms of having a mature weight EPD so that we can break apart some of this antagonism between weaning weight and mature size?
So I'll just start out with what we're doing. So we do have, most of you don't know because we don't publish it, we have a mature weight EPD, but it's a function of earlier growth. It's a function of birth weight, yearling weight, birth weight, weaning weight, post-weaning gain. And frankly, it's because we essentially get almost no mature weights. We get like I said, back in Marty's day, he and Jerry ran around the country collecting mature weights. So we had a blip of mature weights. After that, we essentially have almost no mature weights. So we do predict mature weight, and that's what we use to get a prediction of what a cow is going to eat, what a bull's sires or what a bull's daughters are going to eat. We use a prediction of mature weight and ultimately a prediction of maintenance requirements, and then the level of milk also, the higher milk level certainly associated with higher weaning weights, but also associated with higher nutrient requirements to supply the factory with milk. So I don't want to shut down discussion, but we do have a mature weight EPD converted into a maintenance requirement EPD, and it's used in the index. And that's something I think we need to talk about, and the board has brought this up in the Breed Improvement Committee. We may want to make another stab, make a stronger effort at trying to get mature weights submitted by breeders. Might incorporate it into the Performance Advocate Program and make it a requirement if you want to get high levels on the Performance Advocate Program.
Oh, I guess that's me. Wait, a point and then a question. First point, in the large herds, and I'm a believer in indexes, contrary to what you believe sometimes, but one size does not fit all with API. In the large herds, there's a lot that need something for heifers and want more for cows. And that's where I still think there's a need for more than just the API index, which is the standard, I'll just say, I'll be kind to you, which has become the standard of American Simmental. I think there's more. There's a need for more. So that's my point. And You always have a response, so I'll give you that. My question is as we move to bold, what's the, and maybe this is too early, maybe this is for later, but what's the correlation between stayability, which I'll just call an extrapolated trait, in bold and in our current evaluation? Because stay drives API. So if we're correct on stay, or are we correct on stay, maybe that's the question.
Actually, well, firstly, as you expected, well, I have a response. Yeah, we were quite pleased when we compared. We've made multi-breed stay runs through both, and Bruce he's back there, he can speak to this more, but the stay in Simmental, the correlation between stay that has been done at Colorado State and the stay that we've ran over the last months is quite strong. I mean, 0.85 is the correlation. So that means, in general, you're not going to have an upsetting of the apple cart. You know, at 0.85, you're going to have shifting for sure. There's going to be some bulls that shift around at 0.85, but it's not like your good ones are going to be bad and vice versa consistently. So, you know, we were fairly pleased with the trait like stayability. We have a new model. We applied a new model that actually, where's Bruce in here? Bruce Holmquist, that's one Bruce. Bruce actually applied the model. Bruce Holmquist was involved, and I don't see him, but there he is. So he was involved with supporting the effort to develop this model. It was developed up in Canada, actually. So we came across it, and it looked like a pretty viable model, and Bruce took a stab at it, and Lauren was involved, and we got Colorado State involved as well, Scott Spidell. And the outcome was that it looks like it's going to rank bulls pretty similar to what we've been ranking them now. And we also, you know, we have the latitude for the first time to look at differences between breeds for stayability. It looks like Simmental has made a lot of progress relative. We've looked at Red Angus and Angus and so forth. We have caught up. At one time, we were well behind those breeds. More recently, we've caught up and maybe even passed those breeds for stability.
Question up front.
Okay, Wade. I'm going to kind of echo what Willie said a little bit about a need for another EPD, you know, the API EPD. I was on the board when you guys introduced this. And, you know, the API was kind of a catch-all for a guy that had a small herd of cattle, is how Jerry explained it to us. He wanted to breed his his yearling heifers to the same bulls as mature cows, so that part had to work. So cavities was heavily weighted. But then also the marbling end of the deal. But there's another equation in there that I don't think is getting fit very well in this API deal, and yet you said it's the most profit-driven EPD of the whole deal. But 99% of the commercial cattlemen out in the world get paid for the weight they take to town. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that cattle have to be big to weigh more. You know, if somebody says mature cow weight, mature cow weight can vary with one animal with environment. Environment, I think, plays a big part in what mature cow weight is. You know, I guess we run quite a few cows and we don't pamper them, we leave them out. Our mature cow weight, I think, is very average. But I still think the guys that come to my herd to buy bulls, there's guys that come to buy heifer bulls, and there's guys that, but about 80% of them come to increase performance for pay weight for their payday. And I think you're missing the boat a little bit. You're waiting the marbling deal, and don't get me wrong, they got to cut good. But I still think that this API has way too much weight on the end product for you might have to say the feed or the pack or whatever. And we got to produce cattle that'll work that way, but we also have to satisfy the guy that sells his calves by the pound or at weaning time. And you're telling the average cowman to just go out there and look and say, okay, this is going to make you the most money. My real extreme high API cattle, I try to use them the best I can, but most of them prove to be a little more frail at weaning time, and they just don't have quite the ability to make pay weight the way some of these cattle, about 20 or 30% down. I explained in my bull sale catalog that API, if you're wanting to pick heifer bulls and cattle that you want to retain all the way to the end, maybe go that way, but it isn't profitable for the average cowman that sells his calves at weaning to pick the extreme high API cattle. They ain't gonna make them the most money.
Okay, you might be surprised to hear me say this. It's easier to say it to you, Bill, even though you essentially said the same thing Willie did, but you've got some good points. Did you catch that, Willie? Okay, so you touched on several things there. So one is, yeah, we could make an index that was, actually would probably take 2 more indexes. You'd have to have one specifically for use on heifers, life cycle, all-purpose index for use on heifers, and one for use on mature cows. And what you'd see generally is the one on mature cows, the weighting on calving ease would be less. The one on heifers, the weighting would be more. And Erica Kenner has pointed out to our breed improvement committee, and we've talked about it up in Canada at meetings I've been at in Canada. Right now we only publish a heifer calving ease. Our calving ease is heifer calving ease. It's how sires would be expected to perform for calving ease when used on heifers. So, there can be a pretty wide range from top to bottom when you're using a set of bulls on heifers. Now, we used to publish a cow calving ease. It was cow calving ease. You know what happens to calving ease when you publish a cow calving ease? The range shrinks down. It shrinks down to where there's very little difference from the best to the worst bulls, especially now on our modern bulls. There's not very many sim-influenced bulls out there that are going to give people trouble on cows. They just won't. So there's only a few percentage difference between modern Simmental bulls when used on cows. So that's what we would see, Bill. We would see, one index if used on heifers. We would increase the importance of calving ease. The one in cows, we would decrease it. So there'd be some shifting. As far as the weighting on marbling, what I'd say to that is that's based on the grid prices that are, Cattle Facts tells us about a $10 choice to select spread, and I don't think that's very far off. So based on the grid prices, that's what we need to do if we want a whole herd life cycle index. Now, if you're talking about guys that just, they say, I don't care what they're going to do post-weaning because I sell them at the sale barn. Then, yeah, we're putting way more weight on marbling than we should. In fact, we shouldn't put any marbling or weight on marbling because they're selling their calves at weaning. The problem with that approach, we have, these are breed-wide or population-wide anymore. I shouldn't say breed-wide. These are population-wide indexes. What would happen if we had breeders that used an index that, yeah, some commercial guy could use because he doesn't care about post-weaning, because he doesn't keep his calves. If we used that, we could easily see our population decline in post-weaning traits. And our thought was we don't want to do that. Now, Angus, on the other hand, has more of an approach that you are advocating, and that is to have several different indexes for different phases of the production cycle. Okay, and we could do that, that's feasible. We can certainly do that. One of the things it does, it just ratchets up the number of indexes that are out there, and people can pick and choose, what index they want. And there's some pluses that isn't necessarily bad, but I think when you're trying to direct an entire population and you have piles of indexes, they only cover certain specific segments of the cattle cycle or a production system, I don't think that's a good idea, and I think over the years our breed improvement committee has deemed that not to be a good idea. So can we do things like we could publish, again, going back now to the cow thing, the cows aren't going to have any trouble calving out of most any bulls. We could publish a cow calving ease EPD. So maybe people would have less concern when they looked at if they're going to buy a bull to use on their cows. They would have less concern for calving ease on that bull. I could see doing that. I'd be very hesitant to start pumping out many more indexes, if any.
I'm not asking you to make a cow calving ease index. I'm asking you to make an EPD that a guy can use on his mature cows, and still keep heifers and sell his calves terminally.
But that's an index, right? When you're talking about an index.
No, well, the terminal index does not have to keep replacement heifers. That's terminal. But the API deal, when you put the extreme cavities in it, some of these guys are asking for a little bit more performance, maybe just.
Well, then again, here, Bill, then again, if we were to look at a list of the top 1% API bulls, if you think they don't, on the average, they're average for growth. But like I said, there are bulls in there that are very high for growth. So if that is what your customers want, pick those kind of bulls.
But then you have phenotype and structure and frame size and all that goes in with that, and that narrows that thing down a long ways.
Yeah.
Wait, it's dead now.
I just like to make one comment that every day I hear from my customers that, yeah, we sell cattle by the pound. Bill, you're exactly right. And we need to weigh more pounds. But one of the biggest things you guys haven't even thought about is, in this discussion right here, is a mature cow on her 4th try will wean close to a 100-pound bigger calf than she will on her 1st try. And the best way for you to increase the amount of pounds you sell is to have a higher percentage of mature cows. That's why stayability is so important. And just your comment earlier, my customers that are using lots and lots of high growth Angus stuff aren't seeing increased wean weights. Why? They have a higher percentage of first calf heifers.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Mike, because that is, so if you have a high turnover rate, in other words, if you have low stability, you have a high turnover rate. What does that mean? You have younger cows, which also translates into just lighter calves because they are not at their peak production level. So that's another factor, and that's factored into the API index. The fact that when you have high stability, your cows tend to be older, they stay in a herd longer, you spread your investment out over many more years, plus they tend to have higher pay weights, heavier weaning weights.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt one quick second. I think we've got 2 folks lined up for comments, and then after that we should probably take a break. So try and move it.
I'm probably old-fashioned, but people that help me along the road, all orphans with the person with the beef extended service and started the first Beef Performers Association, and with him, I graduated in '56, which is the same year, and he had a saying that Fred Wilson used to say, in the United States and in the world we stood still on animal production before we started Cuban murder. And in the United States we went backwards. We had dwarfism and everything else. And when the Mile City Experiment Station started Cuban records in their line 1 Hereford, they increased the yearling weight and the weaning weight, but the birth weights went up the same way. And they had a formula, Dr. Woodward, and they took the yearling weight minus 3.2 times the birth weight and then re-indexed them. It changes the whole order. of all the bulls. And so I view this on my own, and selecting a bull like this gentleman that wanted to use a heifers and cows.
Thanks, Don. Yeah, Ray Woodward was certainly ahead of his time, and I forgot to put him on my slide set, because Ray would have been at Fort Keel for a while.
I'd just like to reiterate, I mean, if I have too much time on my hands, so I watch superior sales. And if you do an ocular data set, the wean weights haven't changed in years. And then there's been big commercial data sets that come out, just to reiterate the first point I made. Big commercial data sets that come out, and most of them weaning weights in commercial herds. Granted, some people have better environments and can handle bigger weaning weights, but they haven't been, on average, haven't been increasing weaning weight. Who's been taking advantage of the increased growth are feedlots, not your commercial customers. You don't want to send them to have dot-head calves, but it's been their customers have been taking advantage of the increased growth. And so, yes, you want the calves worth more. You know, you hopefully have reputation feeder cattle, so you want them worth more at weaning, so they have post-weaning gait and marbling and all the things that a feedlot's going to get paid for, so that you have reputation feeder cattle. And then after that, you need to be looking at your cow cost if you're stayability, heifer pregnancy,